This is EZErgo, the online assessment tool to allow you to complete ergonomic assessments associated with manual handling, pushing and pulling, repetitive tasks involving the upper limbs, or tasks that involve the entire body. EZErgo can be used on any handheld device, tablet, mobile phone or laptop, or indeed on your PC. It allows you to carry out assessments using the internationally recognized tools of MAC, ART, RAPP and REBA. It allows you to upload photographs or video to support your assessment. It also allows you to identify where you need to focus improvements and indeed prioritize these improvements based on risk. The tool then allows you to track these action items to completion, generate reports at the push of a button, and can reduce assessment time by up to 80%. Carrying out an EZErgo assessment is very simple, with 6 steps. We first filter to identify if an ergonomic assessment is required. We then analyze the task into its various components. We assess each component using one of the assessment tools. We identify our areas for improvement. We track the implementation of the improvement using our integrated action tracker, and we reassess to compare before and after in relation to risk. This is the filter step. We start by inputting the data in the information fields of the platform, and we will cover that in a later tutorial. The risk filter, however, is based on us answering questions specific to ergonomic risks. If the answer to all of the questions is no, well then no further assessment is required and you have a record of having considered ergonomics for this activity. If, however, we identify an ergonomic risk such as complaints of aches and pains, large range of movements, or an activity involving pushing, pulling, moving things, well then the box at the end of the screen will turn yes, indicating that an assessment is required, and that leads us to the next step, which is the analyze step of the risk assessment process. We are now at the second step, which is the analyze step. The information is pre-populated from the data we input during the filter step of the assessment process. And now we are at the stage of analyzing the task or activity into its component parts. So we add individual components or sub-processes or equipment sections, and for this example I'm going to say we have a sub-process in relation to the packing and shipping of packing boxes. And once I submit that, you'll see this appears here in our section that allows me to determine which assessment tool I want to use to assess the sub-process of packing boxes. I can then subsequently add another sub-process, so which is placing on labels, for example. And of course, all of the system comes with the standard functionality of delete and edit functions. I can now go to our next step of the process, which is physically carrying out the assessment. So once I select whether I want to do a MAC, a RAPP, an ART, or a REBA assessment, I can move to the next stage. So to continue to the third step, the assessment step, we select the tool that we want to use. So for illustration, I'm going to start with the MAC tool, and we input the required data. And to use the MAC tool, you have the support of easy to use graphics, which will help you to determine the score for each risk factor. So based on the illustration, you can identify whether or not that particular risk factor presents a high, medium, or low risk. Similarly, if I return to show you the RAPP tool, the RAPP tool is presented in a very similar format. Again, you input the data explaining more about the activity of pushing and pulling, and again you have your graphics to help you to decide whether or not the risk factor is high, medium, or low. So again, we'll observe the postures based on the graphics, and if we need any additional information, that information is provided in a drop-down menu for each tool. Again, for illustration, we will show you the Art tool. And the interface for the Art tool, again, provides you with the guidance in relation to assessing each risk factor and also your illustrative graphic to help identify the scoring for each particular risk factor. And as we input the data, again, you'll see that the risk colors change depending on the level of risk being assessed. So we're now at our next step in the process, which is the improvement step. And the improvement step allows us to identify what controls are required and by whom the controls should be implemented. So as you'll see at the bottom of your screens, the risk factor in this particular case is identified as being the obstacles en route. So on the top of your screen, you'll see a box with a red 3, which means that this push and pull assessment has identified obstacles en route as being a high risk. So the risk factor that we're trying to address are the obstacles en route. We identify who's responsible. We have then identified the suggested controls. In this case, we're rerouting the activity. And we have an expected completion date or timeline for implementing that control measure. And we also identify whether or not this should be completed on the basis of a high, medium, or low risk. So we're now at our penultimate step, which is the implementation step, which is about tracking items through to completion. So on this screen, you'll see the expected completion date, the status of items, and the level of compliance as to whether or not they're overdue. Also here, we can generate a report, and the report allows us, as you'll see on this screen, to track the various fields such as, and filter by the various fields such as the site, the value stream, sub-process, and of course these titles here at the top, the site, value stream, they are all customizable in the management tool on EZErgo. So again, a very quick, easy way to check the completion of actions arising from the assessment. One other part of the implementation stage is when I'm going to go to one more screen here, which is after completion of the assessment, you may want to find out or to challenge what corrective action might improve the risks or reduce the risk to an acceptable level. So all of the completed assessments come with a little sandbox, and a sandbox, in my opinion, is where you go to play. So if I open the sandbox view here, you'll see it at the bottom right hand of your screen. You will, now I haven't completed those fields for illustration purposes here, so as you'll see, here's the completed assessment, and I'm able to modify or change and say, well, what if I was to improve the chair or increase the clearance beneath a particular desk? That might improve neck posture. So how will that affect the overall score? So in this one, we're still at a high risk here. So we might, for example, make another change in relation to provision of armrests or otherwise. So we reduce the risk to the appropriate level there. And as you'll see, we're seeing at the end of that screen the impact that improvement action is having on the risk. And it's just a great way in real time to establish what is the best control is to most positively affect the risk before resources are particularly allocated and the company goes down the wrong road in relation to the corrective action. So this is our final step, going from implementation through to reassessment. So this is the main interface for the view assessments, and you'll see all the completed assessments, and they can be filtered by various categories, whether it's by country, region, site, department, value stream, or whatever you choose to call each of the fields. And as you'll see, we have a number of actions, and again they're color coded in relation to whether or not the outstanding action is low risk, medium or high. So in terms of looking at the action tracker for this assessment, this was the one where we said we needed to reroute the, as you'll see down here, reroute the activity. So we're now going to update this because the activity has been rerouted. So we look at the update icon and we're going to say here the reroute the activity, the new route has been implemented via the front offices, and I'm going to change the status to completed. And now I'm going to update my consideration and I'll be immediately driven to redoing the tool. So you mark this as complete. Do you want to redo this tool? And I can do this at this stage or come back to it later on. So of course I'm going to say yes here, and this brings me straight back to the assessment stage again, where I can reassess the tool and the information that I originally pre-populated can be updated or can be left as is if some of the data has not changed. You've already seen how easy and efficient it is to use EZErgo to complete on-site ergonomic assessments. I'd now like to talk you through some of the additional features of EZErgo. The first, of course, is the ability to generate reports. So you can generate a very detailed report containing all of the information completed during the assessment, or at the touch of a button, as you'll see on the top of the screen here, and you can just have a summary report printed for circulation to relevant personnel on site. Another additional feature is to reduce the duplication of time. You can, as you'll see at the end of this screen, create a new assessment using existing parameters of a completed assessment. And this is very efficient and effective when, for example, you may have 2, 3 or multiple pieces of equipment or multiple tasks in different locations that are generally similar but each need to be reviewed independently. So you can use one as a template and create a new assessment using those parameters. An excellent cost saving and time saving tool with EZErgo. Another little tool that we have, of course, is job rotation is one of those common improvements for ergonomic risks. And we have the ability with EZErgo to use a comparison or a job rotation comparison tool. So for repetitive tasks, for example, we can pick the 2 activities that we need to compare, that we're suggesting that someone will go from activity A to activity B on a job rotation, and we can see if that's going to be an effective rotation cycle. So we add both to the comparison tool, and you will see a job rotation comparison to see if the risk factors for each individual upper limb element are good or bad for that job rotation proposal. And indeed, all of these are supported by a suite of e-learning modules to increase awareness for ergonomics on a site and indeed develop competence in completing ergonomic assessments. And one final issue, as most organizations are subject to audit, each assessment has a unique identifier for traceability and audit purposes.